On this Friday night, the big ask for this long weekend. Stay home and keep your circle tight.
We need to act now. We know this is no small sacrifice.
The tough new restrictions in parts of Ontario as infections spread. New and apparently improved the revisions to Canada's rent subsidy program. The Nobel Peace Prize for feeding the hungry.
No one should go to bed hungry, much less starve to death.
Decades of dangerous work finally honored. And Otterly Cute, one aquarium's big attraction.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Lots to get to on this Friday night as we enter the first Thanksgiving long weekend with COVID-19. The message to everyone is stay home and keep your circle small because the forecast is for the virus to accelerate.
We're at a tipping point in this pandemic. Not only is the second wave underway, yesterday we hit the highest daily recorded cases, well above what we saw this spring.
This is the shape of Canada's curve. Cases slowed over the summer but are now accelerating, and each new case is spreading the infection to more than one person. People between 20 and 39 still make up the bulk of new cases, but they are now rising in older, more vulnerable people too, and it's forecast cases will keep climbing unless changes are made. The bottom line? We need to reduce our contacts. In Ontario, tough new restrictions are now mandatory as of midnight tonight in 3 hotspot regions, Toronto, Peel, and Ottawa. That means no indoor dining at restaurants and bars. Gyms, casinos, and movie theaters will be closed. As of Tuesday, all wedding receptions will be cancelled. All of that remains in effect for 28 days.
All trends are going in the wrong direction. Left unchecked, we risk worst-case scenarios, first seen in Italy and New York City.
More federal support is on the way for small businesses caught in the pandemic restrictions. We'll have more on that in just a moment. But first, Couteur and a closer look at where the virus is spreading and what's being done to slow it down.
It's come to this again. Restaurant owners are praying for pleasant patio weather because they're being forced to close indoor dining rooms for the second time in this pandemic.
It's a tough decision to make, but at the end of the day, it's public safety first. You know, it really sucks. It really does.
After weeks of resisting this decision, Ontario Premier Doug Ford was briefed with sobering statistics.
Didn't sleep a wink last night.
What Ford most certainly saw was where COVID-19 is being spread. The latest modeling numbers from the Public Health Agency of Canada show spikes in schools and childcare centres as they were reopened, but they were smaller clusters. A bigger concern is the steady rise in long-term care facilities and the large number of outbreaks related to large indoor gatherings.
If I didn't make this decision now, I'd be negligent. It was the single toughest decision I've made since I've taken office, bar none.
The good news is that the hospitalization rate across the country remains low, but that's because of who is contracting the disease. There's been a bump recently in the elderly, and the overwhelming majority is in 20 to 39-year-olds, according to the numbers from the Public Health Agency of Canada. Now, in the spring, a blanket ban on going out helped crush the curve. Facing an even worse second wave, the Prime Minister believes targeted shutdowns is the way to go.
We know a lot more about where transmissions are happening, what businesses and what activities create particular vulnerabilities. And that's why in the second wave, we're able to be more targeted in our approach.
That's being coupled with a plea for people to stay home and stay away from each other, because health officials say social circles were much smaller in the spring.
Now when the contact tracers go out for confirmed cases, it's in the dozens or even 60 or 70 people. And why is that?
Doctors say those decisions by Canadians weeks ago have led to where we are today. But they have hope that people will heed the warnings now to prevent even tighter restrictions in the future. Donna?
All right, Couteur, thank you. Here is the picture across the country today. There were 119 new cases reported in BC, 277 in Alberta. In Saskatchewan today, 22 new cases reported. In Manitoba, 84. Ontario hit a new record, 939 new cases today, while in Quebec there were more than 1,100. 2 new cases reported in Newfoundland and Labrador and 13 in New Brunswick. 2 regions of New Brunswick are now moving back into that province's orange phase. The changes take effect in the Moncton and Campbellton health regions at midnight. Personal services like hair salons must close, plus gyms, casinos, and theaters. People need to stay within 2 household bubbles. The rest of New Brunswick remains in the yellow phase. Alberta is hoping new voluntary public health restrictions will be enough to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in Edmonton. There are now more than 1,300 active cases in the region. Here's what we know about how people are getting infected. About 36% of positive cases were exposed to the virus by a close contact.
Where transmission is known, household or community contacts appear to be a key driver in spreading the virus throughout the city. Social gatherings and family gatherings continue to be a factor in virus-spreading events.
Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health says 26% of Edmonton's cases are linked to an outbreak. Some have occurred in workplaces where the virus spread between employees. People in Edmonton are now being asked to wear masks in workplaces when they can't safely distance and to limit indoor family gatherings to a maximum of 15 people. There is a new federal rent relief program for small businesses in this country, a replacement for the one that got lots of complaints. The biggest change, business owners can apply directly and don't have to go through landlords. David Akin breaks down how it works and who is eligible.
The difficult reality is that the health measures we are taking to contain COVID-19 mean there are some businesses that simply cannot operate at full capacity.
It will be local health authorities that will order some businesses to close to try to flatten Canada's COVID-19 curve. But it will be the federal government backstopping those businesses that get flattened by those closures.
We know this second wave will be even harder for those who get hit.
So the federal government announced an improved suite of business support programs Friday, chief among them the new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. Unlike the previous rent subsidy program, this one will see money go directly to commercial tenants, not landlords. Businesses who have seen revenues drop by 75% can get a subsidy of up to 65%. And those businesses that are ordered to close by health officials, they can get a 90% subsidy of rent and other expenses. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy continues until next June. This one gives employers up to 65% of the wages that they're paying employees. And the Canada Emergency Business Account is expanded. Businesses can now get an additional interest-free loan of $20,000, and for some, $10,000 of that will be forgiven.
For a number of businesses, depending on where you're located in the country, we're in a second wave. Depending on what sector you're on, restrictions may have already been placed or they're starting tomorrow morning.
And one final update on support for individual Canadians. The new simplified employment insurance system is in place, and the government's new benefit programs to help those forced to take sick leave or needing time off to be caregivers to children are also up and running. Next week, applications will open for the Canada Recovery Benefit. That's a replacement for the CERB for those, like the self-employed, who do not qualify for EI. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
The federal government is also supporting food banks across the country. Another $100 million is being added to the Emergency Food Security Fund. That's on top of the $100 million already invested in the program in April. The first phase helped provide an estimated 6 million meals to 2 million Canadians. In the U.S., COVID-19 is now the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. According to the magazine Scientific American, the virus has killed more people in the U.S. than the flu, stroke, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. The human toll is higher than in any U.S. conflict except for the Civil War and World War II. Since the pandemic began in March, the curve in the U.S. has never really flattened, and it appears to be heading for a third peak. Case numbers are climbing again. More than 55,000 new infections were reported today. As Jackson Prosco reports, they're rising so fast, some states are running out of hospital beds.
The sprawling line for COVID-19 testing in Wisconsin shows a state on high alert. Cases are surging. Hospitalizations have already soared, up 500% in some counties.
I would say every hospital is one bed away from being over capacity. Some are actually over it already.
The governor has activated a 530-bed field hospital while bringing in new restrictions on restaurants and bars.
Right now in the state of Wisconsin, we are in a bad place.
Who's next?
It's not just Wisconsin. The virus is roaring back across the U.S., with cases on the rise in at least 31 states. Parts of New York City have gone back under lockdown. Broadway will stay dark until at least May. Americans are being told to brace for the extra challenge of flu season no matter where they live, with predictions the number of deaths could nearly double to 400,000 by January.
As we get into the fall and the winter, it is conceivable, if not likely, that we could have two converging respiratory infections at the same time.
25 days before the election, there's still no clear pandemic message from Washington. The coronavirus positive president insists he's ready to return to campaigning, though he struggled to get through a phone interview Thursday night.
Absentee is okay, because absentee ballots excuse me.
There's still no agreement on a $1 trillion government relief package as unemployment remains high.
I almost accepted I was going to die.
Caught in the middle are everyday Americans like 19-year-old Alexandria Rakowski. She spent 2 weeks in hospital recovering from COVID-19 and still suffers from rashes and hair loss. 7 months into the pandemic, she's left frustrated by people and politicians who still refuse to play it safe around the virus.
I always say it feels like a slap in the face. It's a lack of empathy. It's heartbreaking.
Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
As much as we wish it were so, the virus has not vanished. More than 350,000 new cases were reported across the world just today. That's a new daily record. In England, cases are doubling now every week. French hospitals are beginning to run out of ICU beds. Spain has declared a state of emergency in Madrid. And as Crystal Gamansing reports, the fall is going to be full of tight restrictions.
Spot checks on the streets of Madrid as police enforce rules in the capital and 9 neighboring communities. Traveling in and out of the city is not allowed unless it's for work or a medical appointment. Madrid's regional government argues the travel rules are excessive and hurt the economy, and they took their argument to court where they won, prompting Spain's national government to reinstate the Emergency Act Friday. The back and forth left people unclear of the rules and frustrated. This man says it's also got to do with the lack of precautions from citizens. If we had behaved better, we would not be at this point. Most agree restrictions are needed to keep hospitals from being overwhelmed. But how best to do that is pitting regional and national leaders against one another. German Chancellor Angela Merkel warned citizens about strict new rules being considered, such as limiting pub and restaurant hours. Merkel, however, stressed consensus is needed. Mayors from the 11 largest cities all agreed on the rules that will be imposed if infections exceed 50 people per 100,000. Germany has one of the lower infection rates in Europe. The UK has one of the highest.
It's right that the government considers a range of options to address that and considers all the evidence, but it's also right that they engage with local leaders, and that's what is happening this afternoon and over the weekend.
More than 108,000 COVID-19 infections have been recorded in the past 7 days, and that's with a series of local restrictions around Britain. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
A slam dunk against hunger coming up at Toronto Raptor, brightening Thanksgiving for hundreds of families. Quebec's premier has replaced his Indigenous Affairs minister 2 weeks after Joyce Echaquan recorded hospital staff saying racist things and insulting her shortly before she died. Echaquan's death at the hospital in Joliette focused criticism on the fact the province has failed to address systemic racism. A former Montreal police inspector is taking over the Indigenous Affairs portfolio.
This is relation, this is trust. I'm going to build that. I'm going to start that today, and people will judge me on my actions.
He says his first priority is to talk with First Nations chiefs. New details are emerging about that alleged plot to overthrow the Michigan state government, kidnap the governor, attack the police, and try to start a civil war. The attorney general says Governor Gretchen Whitmer and her family were moved around as law enforcement tracked the men suspected in the case. At least 13 people, including members of a militia group, were charged after the FBI thwarted the elaborate plot. It's alleged the men spent months doing firearms training and drills, rehearsing how to snatch the governor from her vacation home before the November presidential election. Whitmer has faced criticism from right-wing protesters for measures she imposed to try to control the spread of the coronavirus. Still ahead, new stats on sex assaults add to calls for change on Canadian campuses. Three years into the Me Too movement, there is still much that has to change. New figures from Statistics Canada show 11% of female post-secondary students say they've been sexually assaulted on campus. At Canadian military colleges, 28% of female cadets say they've experienced a sexual assault. The perpetrators were often fellow students. As Heather Yurix-West explains, advocates say part of the problem is the culture at Canadian colleges and universities.
CJ was 18 when she moved from her home in Saskatchewan to attend school at Calgary's Mount Royal University. It was her first time living away from home.
I was learning a lot. I had friends. It took a turn.
CJ says she was sexually assaulted in her dorm room one night by someone she had thought of as a friend. She reported the incident to both police and school officials. But while a police investigation resulted in a criminal charge, the school's investigation dismissed her complaint.
And it was just devastating, like absolutely devastating.
CJ's story is not unique. This York University student says, like CJ, they were sexually assaulted in their campus residence with someone they considered a friend.
We were friends, we were good friends. And the context of the situation was I broke up with a partner. And I was very distraught, and I went to him for comfort because I thought that I could.
I think it's really a continued concern that people are experiencing sexual assault at such high rates. There's no reason why we can't have great educational programs run on campus for young people in particular, who are by and large the ones on campus spaces, to kind of unpack some of the root causes of gender-based violence and sexual assault.
CJ's alleged assault happened in the fall semester of 2018. Since then, Mount Royal University has made changes to its sexual assault policy. The school's new president says its procedures are more trauma-informed. Still, he admits there is likely more work to be done.
I think the expectations of us are high, and we hate to disappoint, and we're going to continue to do what we can in order to minimize these kinds of incidents.
But for CJ, life since the alleged assault has been difficult. She dropped out of school soon after her sexual assault complaint was dismissed and is now anxiously awaiting the accused's criminal charge to go to trial. She's also looking to the future, hoping to one day return to post-secondary school.
It's going to be very, very hard to trust people.
Heather Yurix-West, Global News, Calgary.
Decades of feeding the hungry. Next, this year's Nobel Peace Prize winner. Well, we wanted to add a little levity to your Friday evening, so this is May, a sea otter at a Japanese aquarium. She's learned to walk on her two hind legs. I don't really have much more to tell you about her, but sometimes no words are needed, right? What a cutie. Well, feeding the world's hungry is what the World Food Program has been doing for more than 50 years. It rarely makes headlines, but its work is so vital as it gets, in fact. It's kept tens of millions of people in conflict zones alive, and it's now being recognized with a Nobel Peace Prize. Eric Sorensen explains why.
The setting was symbolic and fitting.
I can't believe I'm in Niger when we got the award.
When word came of the Nobel Prize, the most senior executive of the largest humanitarian organization in the world was in Niger, a poor and hungry country that gets little attention, but for the selfless, often unsung work of the World Food Program.
I didn't win it, you won it. It's all of us.
Some organizations respond to sudden catastrophes. The World Food Program is almost everywhere all the time, in nearly 90 countries, resolutely helping almost 100 million people in need of food last year. From Sudan to Somalia to Yemen, it's often a vicious cycle. Conflict disrupts food supplies, then hunger triggers more conflict. To the Nobel Committee, the World Food Program is a force for peace.
For acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister toured a World Food Program distribution centre in Beirut just 6 weeks ago after the devastating explosion. The WFP has praised Canada for being the 7th largest donor in the world. Some say Canada should contribute more to foreign aid, though the Nobel in effect recognizes that many nations, including this one, do reach out and help.
This is to recognize multilateralism at a time where a lot of countries are becoming more isolated or isolationist, and to really look at how through solidarity, through cooperation, we can make a difference.
Hunger, though, has spread even further this year because of the global pandemic. The Nobel Prize draws attention to the never-ending need for food and security somewhere in the world.
Alongside fighting this health pandemic, we absolutely have to prevent a hunger pandemic and a hunger catastrophe. And this prize bolsters that effort.
An effort that carries on because 1 in 9 people worldwide still do not have enough to eat. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Donna Friesen. We leave you tonight with a basketball star giving back. Toronto Raptor Kyle Lowry and his wife are donating 200 Thanksgiving hampers to families in need in Toronto. It's the 5th year they've done this. Thanks for watching. Have a lovely and safe Thanksgiving. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.